plan for today? All right, so the plan for today is we're going to be talking about more complicated arguments. And so basically what that means is everything we've talked about this far, you can think of as building up the building blocks to arguments and good reasoning. And so what makes reasoning and good arguments so powerful is that if you start with a small part and that small part is valid, you can attach it to a lot of different other arguments that are also valid and build up a very long, complicated argument where if the premises are true, the conclusion is guaranteed to be true. And you can know that because you know each of the different little parts that are put together into that argument are valid parts. So that's generally where we're going. Is we're moving on to taking these simple arguments of the sort we've been looking at in our homework, and then starting today and then talking more about it on Thursday, we're going to look at how to turn those little building blocks into more complicated arguments and the different ways building blocks can work together, the different ways premises can lead to other conclusions, etc. So what I want to start off with, though, excuse me, is I want to go over the homework for today. So I'm going to share my screen. And then what I'm going to do is I'll be going back and forth between screen sharing the homework assignment and then also just going up here and writing some things on the board. So while, see if I can find this. Let's see if I can successfully share my screen. This is always an adventure for me. All right, so share screen. Share screen to this one, share. Okay, let me make sure that it's all on the screen. All right, can everyone see the whole thing?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to ask you all to give me answers to these. First off, a couple things on the homework. The main thing I'd say is two things. One, if you do not do as well on your homework as you wanted to, do not stress about it. There are many more chances for points this semester. One homework is not going to make or break your semester. Secondly, though, make sure you always read the instructions. The people who did not do as well on the homework as I think they may have liked, a lot of it is because you forgot to read the instructions and only did some of the homework. Yeah, if you did all of them and you tried your best, everyone did relatively well to very well on it. It was only when you forgot to read the instructions or failed to answer some of the questions that it really didn't go well. So first one, what is the correct answer to number one? Even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. I'm not going to read the rest. You can read it there in front of you. What was the correct answer? Was this deductive, inductive, not an argument? Ryan.
Not an argument.
Not an argument.
Nat and Ryan are correct. This is not an argument. This is just a part of the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. Now, it is working towards a more general conclusion. It is part of a much bigger motion of equality, but it is not by itself an argument. Ryan.
I felt like literally such an idiot just staring at this one, attempting to convince myself that it was an argument of some sort. And I was like Googling stuff, and I was like, no, like I just think it's just him stating stuff. But I sat there for like a very long time. Like
the tough thing, and I think part of the reason this is difficult, and we're going to now talk about it a little more with two, is very often if you just take a part of an argument and just focus on some bits of it, the background is like, because the thing that's tough about this is if you put this into the grander context of what Martin Luther King Jr. was attempting to accomplish and what he was working towards, then there's a certain sense in which his entire life was a sort of argument. And this speech was one of the things he used towards that end. Yeah. So if you think of it in that grander sort of societal context, you can think of it as an argument. This right here, these strings of sentences taken by themselves outside that historical context are not by themselves really an argument. And that's kind of the difficult thing, is sometimes you want to think of something as an argument, but yeah, you're spot on. This one was not by itself actually an argument, even if he had a greater goal he was working towards, and this was one of the steps he took for it. All right, number two. Somebody explain to me what number two was.
Inductive, right?
Say that again.
Deductive?
It was deductive, yes. Now let me stop sharing for a second and explain this one, because this one was a little tricky. So anyone who gets sick when they eat pasta has a gluten intolerance. 2, you get sick when you eat pasta. 3, conclusion, therefore you have a gluten intolerance. All right, so why a lot of people said this was inductive as opposed to deductive, and this is a tricky one. This is why I want to talk about this one. The basic thing you have to recognize about this argument is that, and this is just like the last one with the king argument, you have to stay exclusively focused on what is presented in front of you. Do not think about what's going on in the background, because as we're going to talk about later, it's almost always the case that when you come across an argument in the real world, the premises and conclusion you see are going to be part of something bigger. And so if you put this, each of these premises are very often going to be conclusions in an inductive argument of their own. So if you were to look at number 2, actually, let me make sure that I am reading this correctly. So I'm not, anyone who gets sick when they eat pasta probably has, whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick. You get sick whenever you, so let's go with whenever you, I'm going to change this around so the wording's the exact same as was on the homework. Whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick. Now, it's very likely the case that if you were to concentrate on premise number 2 here, what evidence would you point to? What would your proof be that number 2 is true in your everyday life? What evidence would you have that whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick? Common sense question. I'm not trying to trick anyone. Nat.
Past experiences?
Yeah, this right here, you'd have past experience for number 2. So if number 2 was the conclusion, if you had an argument that looked like this, conclusion, whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick. This right here is a conclusion that comes from premises like this. Premise 1, the first time you ate pasta, you felt sick. Premise 2, second time. Premise 3, third time. So if this was the argument that was presented to you, this would be an inductive argument. This right here could come to the conclusion, whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick. But in this case here, whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick is not a conclusion. It is a premise working towards this conclusion. And in this context, because it is just a premise, this here is an instance of an if-then, because really anyone who gets sick when they eat pasta probably has a gluten intolerance, is another way of saying, if you get sick when you eat pasta, then you have a gluten intolerance. So this is just an if A, then B, A, B. So if you just focus on this, it's an instance of modus ponens, but people were led astray because if you just focus on this and treat it as a conclusion, then this is an inductive argument, but that wasn't what was actually in front of you. So what this is kind of showing, and this is something I want to bring up, is this notion of whether something is a premise or a conclusion is relative to the part of the overall argument you're looking at or relative to the argument that you're in. So what does it mean for something to be relative? So for instance, you might say that, well, here's one. Which is to the right, the sparkly pen or the black marker?
Black marker. Oh, actually. Yeah.
Who's right?
Yeah, it depends on who's looking and what angle. So for mine, the black marker's on the right. But for most of you, actually, I don't know what your screen looks like. I'd imagine it's the opposite, though, as for me. For me, isn't this on your right? Yeah, the sparkly pen should be on your right. So which one's on the right is relative to where you're standing. So in the same sense, in this context, relative to this context, 2 is a premise, and it is a premise in a deductive argument. But relative to this context, it is a conclusion in an inductive argument. So when I was asking about this argument, this right here is just a premise in a deductive argument, and that's why it was deductive. But it was tricky because a lot of us think automatically, whenever would I see somebody say, whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick? That's going to be based on past experience. So our thought is, oh, then the argument itself must be inductive. But this is the conclusion of a different inductive argument. In this case, it is the premise in a deductive argument. Does that make sense to everyone?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. If anyone has any questions, now is a good time to pause. Just want to make sure everyone understands this. And what we're going to be talking about today is because of you can think of your entire life as one big, long argument towards having a good life. And along the way, you're going to have many conclusions that then serve as premises in further things. And so if you think of it in that way, there's never ever an answer of what's a premise or what's a conclusion outside of the particular context you're looking at it. Just like there's no correct answer of what's to the right, the pen or the marker, except relative to where somebody's standing. All right. So let me go back to sharing and we can go through the others. So that was the one that people had the most trouble with. That and number 5, which was another instance of the same sort of thing, where when it rains, the roads will get wet. When the roads get wet, it's dangerous to drive. Therefore, if it rains, it's dangerous to drive. So number 5 is another instance of a deductive argument. But again, the first premise, when it rains, the road will get wet, is the conclusion of a separate inductive argument, because you would need experience to know that's true. But in this context, it's serving as the premise of a deductive argument. Number 3, what was the answer to number 3 while I go and fetch my water bottle from across the room? Was this deductive or inductive or not an argument at all?
Inductive.
Inductive.
It was inductive. Oh, and I forgot to say, so number 1, was it valid, invalid? Doesn't apply. Only arguments are valid or invalid. So number 1 is nothing. Number 2, this one was valid. This is a perfectly valid argument. Number 3, was this cogent / inductively valid?
Yes.
Yeah, it seems pretty cogent / inductively valid. Now, this is something I talked about last time, but the line between inductively valid and inductively invalid is not as clear cut as for validity. With validity, it's either valid or it's not. It's black and white. With an inductive argument, it's a matter of statistics and likelihood. So it's very easy to point to an instance in which something is very clearly inductively valid, because the definition of inductively valid is it's happened a lot of times before, and therefore it's likely to happen again. So a classic example is if I drop something, it will fall to the ground. That is and if I come to the conclusion that the next thing I drop will fall to the ground, that is an incredibly likely conclusion that is very valid because I have a lot of experience for it. If I do something for the very first time, and so for instance, say you've never played darts before and you pick up a dart and you throw a perfect bullseye on the first attempt, does that mean that you're going to throw a bullseye on the next attempt? Intuitively, does it?
No.
No, it doesn't. Why not? Why does the fact you've done it once not in any way indicate that you're going to do it again? And that's in common sense terms here. Yeah, it can be a fluke. And so that's the idea with inductive validity, is basically, if it's likely to have been a fluke, it is not inductively valid. If it is likely that it wasn't a fluke, then it is. So if it was a fluke, inductively invalid or not cogent or not valid. If it's unlikely to be a fluke because it's happened so many times, then you'd say it's inductively valid. And the tough thing with this is the line between enough and not enough is not always clear. So if you throw 2 bullseyes in a row, does that mean that you are going to throw a bullseye the next time, or that you're likely to throw a bullseye next time? Probably not. Still, you can get 2 flukes. But if you do it about 5 times, then maybe we think that you're actually just a hustler and you have actually played darts before. And if you've done it 1,000 times in a row, now we know you're just like very good at darts. So this one here, intuitively, I'd say if you miss all 15 classes, the start of all 15 classes, you're late for every one, then you're probably pretty safe that you're going to miss. It's a pretty safe bet you're going to miss this one. So I would say this is cogent or inductively valid. Number 4, either I'm a human, or I'm a robot and I'm not a robot, so I'm a human. Was this an argument? If so, what type?
Deductive.
Yeah, this was a valid deductive argument. Number 5, I already said, is another valid deductive argument. Number 6. Is number 6 an argument or not?
Not
an argument.
It is not. It is not an argument. Now, it is closely related to things that could be arguments. So for instance, if you say something like, if it's a sunny day, then I'm happy. And it is a sunny day, therefore I'm happy. That would be an argument. But this right here is just stating some things. Is there a question? I can't see who's.
Yeah, I was saying that at first I thought it's an argument because it makes sense, because yeah, the sky and the day is beautiful, sunny day, and I like sunny days, so I am happier on beautiful sunny day, and I thought it makes sense.
So this is a key difference here, is to recognize, so you're spot on that there's some closely related arguments here, because the key with an argument is that the premises are providing the truth of the first things is what allows you or gives you reason to conclude the last things. So if you said something along the lines of, I prefer beautiful sunny days because they make me happy, and today is a beautiful sunny day, therefore I'm going to be happy. But this, as presented, it's just is a statement of fact. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful sunny day. That's just a statement. I like beautiful sunny days. Another statement. I am happier on beautiful sunny days. Just another statement. In no way does the fact that I'm happier on beautiful sunny days explain. Now you could say, if you just focus on the last 2 sentences, you could maybe say that it's an argument of, I'm happier on beautiful sunny days. If I'm happier with something, I like it. Therefore, I like sunny days. That would be an argument. But this, as it's presented, is just 3 disconnected sentences. There's not the connections that you really need here. Does that make sense? And this is the tough thing, because it's closely related to some arguments, but it's not. You have to be very careful when reading it just to make sure. All right. Number 7, was this an argument?
Yes, it was
Yes.
deductive.
It's deductive. Was it valid?
It's invalid.
Invalid.
It is invalid. This was affirming the consequent. And you know this is invalid because the real world is an example in which the 2 premises are true and the conclusion is false. If something is a whale, then it can swim. That is a true statement. Whales can swim. I can swim. As a matter of fact, I, David Neely, am capable of swimming. I learned in camp as a kid. Conclusion, therefore, I'm a whale. I'm sorry to inform you, I am not actually a whale. So this is a case in which the premises are true and the conclusion is false. And if the premises can be true and the conclusion is false, that means it is not valid. As a matter of fact, the first 2 are true, the last one is not, therefore it's not valid. By contrast, 8 is valid. It is a deductive valid argument. This is just a modus ponens case. If something is a whale, it can swim. George is a whale, therefore George can swim. That's just a classic case. Now, number 9, what was this one?
This one was a valid deductive argument. Oh wait, sorry. Number 9 is inductive argument.
Yes, it is a valid inductive argument. Yes, as the way you know it's an invalid or a valid inductive argument is that it's talking about the past, the number of days something has happened before. On this one, if a few of you put inductive invalid, and I was willing to give you that if you included something like, we don't know that Alex didn't throw away their phone, or Alex may have deleted their Instagram, or something like that. Number 10, George is taller than Jack. Jack is taller than Alex. Alex is a robot. Therefore, George is taller than at least one robot. What is this one?
This is a valid deductive argument.
Yep, another valid deductive. And the way this one was, this was just one you kind of had to reason through, where you had to think, if the first thing was true, and the second thing was true, and the third thing was true, could the fourth thing be true? And no, it could not, because if George is taller than Jack and Jack is taller than Alex, then George has to be taller than Alex. And then if Alex is a robot, then George is taller than Alex the robot. So there's at least one robot in the world that George is taller than. So that was the way you had to think that one through. But hopefully that one wasn't too bad for you. And I think everyone did pretty well on that one. All right. Are there any other questions on the homework? On the whole, I think that we're right where we should be, and we're working towards exactly the level of understanding we need. And again, for those of you who came in late, if you didn't do as well in the homework as you wanted, that's okay. The main takeaway was make sure always to read the instructions, because not everyone did. But there are a lot more homeworks and a lot more points on the table. So do not realize, even if you nobody got a 0, but even if you had gotten a 0, an A in the class is still 100% possible. So don't stress about the grade on it. All right. So everyone good so far?
Yes.
Okay. So what I want to talk about now is complex arguments. And what a complex argument is, simply put, is when you take one argument and attach it to another so that it makes one long argument. And the simplest way of showing this is to take this argument example from number 2 and just put it up on the board with this other thing that we had. So instead of having these two, and you can't really see it on the board, instead of having these two as separate, we can put them together into one long argument. So you have the first time you ate pasta, you felt sick. The second time you ate pasta, you felt sick. The third time, so we can say premise ... premise 57. Fourth time you felt, or 57th time you felt sick. So conclusion, so then we have, let's get rid of these P's because that's not important. It's just the numbers that we care about. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm putting these in the wrong spot. 2, 3, 57, ... This leads to the conclusion, 58, that whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick. 59, if you feel sick whenever you eat pasta, you probably have gluten intolerance. 60, you probably have gluten intolerance. So this right here is a complex argument. It takes this background argument for up to whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick. And it then combines that argument with this deductive argument from the homework of whenever you feel sick. Whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick. And if you feel sick whenever you eat pasta, then you probably have a gluten intolerance. To the conclusion, you probably have a gluten intolerance. So this is just a sense in which, like, you take one thing you built out of Legos and you snap it onto another one and you have this. So does everyone just see intuitively that you can just stick arguments together in this way? And when you stick them together, as long as the first bit is valid, and the second bit is valid, the whole thing is going to be valid. So does this general idea make sense of this? All I just did was take this one argument, this inductive argument that leads to the conclusion whenever you eat pasta, you feel sick, combine it with this deductive argument, which leads us to this combination inductive, deductive, valid argument.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Now, this is an example, but the thing is, the short, simple fact is there are multiple ways in which you can have these complicated arguments. And what it comes down to is at each step in the argument, you have premises related to other things which serve as the conclusions. You have some sentences leading to other sentences, or some claims leading to other claims. And there are different types of connections there can be. So what I want to do is talk about the three types of connections there can be between these small parts of an argument, between the premises and conclusion of this, so that we can then see how the overall structure of an argument could be constructed out of these smaller types of examples. So the three ways in which an argument can, or the three ways in which statements can relate to other statements is to serve as convergent premises for some conclusion. So I'm going to write that up, of convergent premises. And what these are, what these convergent premises are, is two statements providing independent support for a third statement. So, an example of this would be a case of, let me think, what would be a good one? The Yankees are so sentence one, the Yankees are the best baseball team. 2, they've won the most World Series. 3, they have the most iconic logo. So if you look at these three sentences, the Yankees are the best baseball team, they've won the most World Series, and they have the most iconic logo. This would be the sort of thing that you can imagine two people arguing about. You can imagine someone from Boston and someone from New York having this argument. And what would the conclusion? If somebody from New York said these three sentences in a row, what is their conclusion? What is the main point they're trying to get across by saying these sentences?
That the Yankees are the best baseball team?
Yeah, so this is the conclusion. The Yankees are the best baseball team. Now, if this is the conclusion, that means these are going to be the premises or the reasons that this conclusion is true. Now, ask yourself, what is the relationship between 2 and 3? What does the fact that the Yankees have won the most World Series have to do with the fact that they have the most iconic logo? Is there any relation at all?
No, not really.
Yeah, not really. So these two things, so each one of those, though, what's the relationship between 2 and 1?
It could serve like as a premise and a conclusion on its own.
Yeah, so 2 is a premise that supports 1. What's the relationship between 3 and 1?
Another premise that...
Exactly. So what we have here, if we were to draw this up, this is a conclusion, so this is the conclusion, number 1. Number 2 is serving as a premise to support that conclusion. And number 3 is serving as a different premise to support that conclusion. These are two convergent premises. So anytime you're giving two independent reasons for a single conclusion, that is a case in which it is called a convergent premise. So we're starting here by just talking about this particular small case. So that's a convergent premise. The next one we're going to talk about is what is called a serial premise. And what a serial premise is where one statement supports a second, and that second then goes on to support a third. So a serial premises, one statement supports a second, which then supports a third. So an example of this would be a case in which, let's go with statement 1. Dogs are better than cats. Statement 2. Dogs are more affectionate. Sentence 3. Dogs will always snuggle. Cats only snuggle sometimes. So this is another set of statements someone might say. Someone might say dogs are better than cats. Dogs are more affectionate than cats. And dogs will always snuggle. Cats only snuggle some of the time. So if somebody were making these statements, remember, going back to our thing, this is an argument. What's the conclusion here? What is the most controversial thing? What is the thing that either comes first or last? Which of these is the conclusion?
Dogs are better than cats.
Dogs are better than cats, yes. So what is the relationship between 2 and 1? What does 2 do for 1?
2 just tries to support that conclusion.
Yeah, this is a premise or support for this conclusion. So if we were drawing up our thing like this, what we have is sentence 1, conclusion, is supported by number 2. Now, though, what is the purpose of 3? What is 3 doing here? The question is 3 completely unrelated to 2, or is 3 related to 2?
It's related.
It's related, and specifically, what is it?
3 is the premise for 2.
Yeah, 3 is a premise for 2. Or another way of putting that is 3 is evidence of 2. 3 is a particular way in which dogs are more affectionate. So this way is 3 supports 2 and 2 supports the conclusion. This is serial. By itself, 3 doesn't support the conclusion. It's rather that 3 supports 2, 2 supports 1. So does that make sense to everyone? These are the first 2 ways in which arguments can be related, or premises can work together or be related to an argument. You can have them where they are completely separate reasons to support a conclusion, or they can be reasons in which they are serial. They go one after another. And this is serial in the sense of series, like the same thing as series, not the same thing as like Captain Crunch, not that one. All right. So those are the first 2. Now, you've got ones where it goes one after the other, ones in which they're completely separate, and the third one is called linked. Can anyone guess what the relationship between 2 linked premises and a conclusion is? Just going off what the meaning of the word linked is. What is it for 2 things to be linked together? Or what is it for 2 things to be linked?
They are
Related? Or
they're related, and also it's not just that they're related, they're connected together to each other. So that's the idea of a linked premise. A linked premise, or several linked premises, is you can have 2 statements that support a conclusion, but only do so together. So any sort of example of the sorts of valid arguments we've been talking about so far falls into this class. So to give an example, 1, Dumbo is an elephant. 2, elephants can't jump. 3, Dumbo can't jump. So here's which of these is the conclusion of these 3. Very simple, straightforward argument.
Dumbo is an elephant.
So another way of asking it, which is the one that you can only prove if the other ones aren't true?
Can't jump.
Yeah, it's Dumbo's an elephant. Dumbo can't jump. Let's change this to, let me make this clear. All elephants can't jump. That's a better way of putting it. Yeah. So when I put it this way, Dumbo's an elephant. All elephants can't jump. Dumbo can't jump. The conclusion here, Olivia says Dumbo can't jump. Yeah. If you put the all here, the conclusion is going to be Dumbo can't jump. Now, if your conclusion is that Dumbo can't jump, let me just put the C here. If the conclusion is Dumbo can't jump, and all I tell you is that elephants can't jump, and you know nothing about Dumbo, can you conclude that he can't jump? If you don't know he's an elephant.
No, you can't conclude that.
No. Now, what if you just know Dumbo is an elephant, but you don't know that elephants can't jump? And as a matter of fact, they cannot jump. I think they're the only land mammal that can't.
Wait, how could you, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt. How could you not conclude that, the way you mentioned, how could you not conclude, like if you didn't like say, I guess that Dumbo's an elephant or something like that, how could you not conclude that? And I say that because kind of just like using like, I guess like context clues. And I get that with like philosophy, you kind of get us like think differently. But just like with context clues, couldn't you ascertain that like Dumbo's an elephant?
So what if I, let me give you one without context clues, because you're right that in this sort of case, you kind of can figure out because somebody would be saying this. So I say this. Here would be the case. Rhinos can jump. Elephants can't jump. Conclusion, Fred can't jump. In this context, is this a case in which we can, so imagine in this case, I've been talking about rhinos and I've been talking about elephants. So you're correct, Dandre, that in a regular case in which those were the only 3 sentences, your common sense is going to kick in and you're going to guess that the person who said this was only doing it because Dumbo's an elephant. But if you're actually thinking about it in a context in which, like outside of the very strict sort of philosophical case, you're not always going to have it in which it's very obvious which of those it is. So if you're having a conversation about rhinos and a conversation about rhinos can jump, and then you're having a conversation about elephants and they can't jump, I don't know why you're having this conversation, but imagine you are. And then you step away for a second, and then your friends are coming back and having an argument about whether Fred can jump or not. Can Fred jump? Well, what's the key piece of information that you need to decide whether Fred can jump or not?
If you say Fred can jump, then I would assume that he's a rhino. And if you say he can't, then I would assume he's an elephant.
Yeah, so what you can do here is, if you had another more complicated case, if the third premise was then something like Fred is a rhino, then you know, conclusion, Fred can jump. But by itself, none of these statements is going to allow you to conclude that Fred can jump. You can only conclude that Fred can jump if you have all 3 of them. Another one would be a case of like, another good one that might be even clearer is a case of disjunctive syllogism. My keys are either in my bedroom or my kitchen. My keys aren't in my bedroom, kitchen or bathroom, my keys aren't in bathroom. Conclusion, must be in kitchen. In this case, no one of these premises is going to allow you to reach this conclusion that my keys must be in the kitchen. It's only when you take them together. It's only if you know that they're only in one of these three places and they aren't in the first one and they aren't in the last one that you know they have to be in the kitchen. So does that make sense? This is a case in which, and this is a much more practical, realistic one of, if you don't know that they're, like, if you don't know this, do you know they're in the kitchen?
No.
Where else? Yeah, because where else could they be? If they're not in the bedroom and they're not in the bathroom, do you know they're in the kitchen? No. Where else could they be in theory?
The laundry room?
The laundry room, they could be, you could have lost them on the street. It's only if you know by definition they're in one, or by stipulation, they're in one of these three places, and you know they're not in this one, and you know they're not in this one, that you know it's in that one. This is an instance of a linked premise. And so the way you draw up a linked premise is P1, P2, P3, all working towards the conclusion. So that's linked. And now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because they can be combined together. So just to go with this example here, where do I still have my rainy? Where's the rain? Did I erase the rain? Yes, I erased the rain. So what you can have, though, are arguments in which there's a serial premise supporting a set of convergent premises. Or you could have a case like our one before. So the example from before of the pasta and the individual who's eaten pasta 57 times and gotten sick every single one of them, leading to the conclusion that whenever you have pasta, you get sick. And then that leading to the conclusion that if you get sick, here, let me just write it out again. Or no, let's go with a different one as our first example. Where's my third one? No. Oh, this is, there we go. Premise one. You should buy the Honda, not the Ford. 2, the Honda is cheaper. 3, the Honda is $12K. The Ford is $15K. 4, the Honda is safer. The Honda got a 5-star safety rating. The Ford got 4 stars. All right, this is a more complicated argument of the sort that you might have like you could imagine having this discussion with someone. This is a case in which it's a more complicated argument than with the ones we've typically been dealing with. Typically, we've been looking at arguments in which it's just a couple of premises working towards one conclusion. This is a longer one that's going to involve some elements of the 3 different types we just talked about. So what I want to do now is work through how you go about learning the argument structure or identifying the structure of this argument. And so what we're ultimately going to do is draw up a little picture of where the conclusion is, what the premises are, which premises are serving to support which other premises which support the conclusion. So does that make sense of what we're going to do with this little passage here? And this is going to be harder than what we're doing on the homework, because the homework, I'm going to give you a structure and just ask you where they all go. But this is generally what we're going to be doing. Is I'm going to give you some sentences and ask and a structure, and you're going to have to tell me where they are. But first off, let's do the more complicated version, because if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. And let's begin with this structure. So first question, if this is an argument, what is the conclusion? What is it if somebody said these 5 sentences? What would they be trying to get across?
1 is the conclusion.
1 is the conclusion. Yes, Netta. You should buy the Honda, not the Ford. So that's our conclusion, number 1. Now, that means the next 4 things are premises. And now, there are multiple structures we can imagine. So let's do this little multiple choice stuff. There's another board. Give me there's my eraser. So, erase the serial premises bit. So if we know that I'm off screen, sorry. If we know that C1 is the conclusion, then the question is, how do all of these relate together? And there are multiple ways they could relate together. This is in theory possible. If this was the structure, it would just mean that it's just like a serial chain where 5 supports 4, 4 supports 3, 3 supports 2, 2 supports the conclusion. Is this the correct structure for this argument? The way you identify, is this the correct structure, is you have to ask yourself, how are all of these things related? Is it the case? If this was the case, then what we'd have would be that 5 would have to be related to 4 by giving us a reason to think 4 is true. And 4 would have to give us a reason to think 3 is true. And 3 would have to give us a reason to think 2 is true. So is this the correct structure?
No.
No, it is not. What gives it away? Why can this not be the correct structure?
Well, sometimes you're talking about cheaper, sometimes you're talking about safety. So because there are different things that aren't related, some things are related, but some aren't.
That's exactly right. So Lauren says, so if this was the case, if this was the structure, all 5 sentences would have to be related. But that's not the case. Now, it is the case that some of them are related. So for instance, everything on here seems somewhat relevant to number 1. That's why number 1 is the conclusion. So which are the sentences that are not related to each other? Give me 2 sentences that have nothing to do with each other.
2 and 4.
2 and 4, was that what was said?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right, 2 and 4, that's spot on. 2 and 4 have nothing to do with each other. So if we know that 2 and 4 have nothing to do with each other, then what can we conclude? Which of the 3 types, serial, convergent, or linked, are instances in which premises have nothing to do with each other?
Convergent.
Convergent. So we know now that there's at least 2 convergent going in this direction. And in particular, we know that somewhere over on this side is going to be 2. So it could be there. We just know somewhere over here is 2, and somewhere over here is 4. And they're not related to each other. Now we just have to figure out which of these various 4 other sentences is directly supporting 1, and which of these is rather supporting another one that's supporting 1, and if so, which are the ones that go together? So intuitively, which of these go together, of these 4 sentences?
2 and 3 go together, and 4 and 5 go together.
Yeah, so 2 and 3 go together, and 4 and 5 go together. And if you were putting in just ordinary English, what's the relationship between 2 and 3?
So it's 2 says that it's cheaper, and then 3 says actually shows that it's cheaper. So it backs up that premise.
Yeah, so 3 backs up or provides the detail on 2. So what you're essentially doing is saying that if you just focus on 2 and 3 and we ignore everything else, 3 is supporting 2. So then what about 4 and 5? What's their relationship together?
It's the same thing. So 5 supports what 4 says.
Exactly. So again, if we cross this out, what we have here is 5 supporting 4, just like 3 supports 2. So now we know that 3 is not directly supporting 1. We know that 5 is not directly supporting 1. And we know that 2 and 3 together are supporting 1, and 4 and 5 are. So what's the last thing we do on the diagram? We just connect what we had before. So that's the structure of this argument. You have a serial premise set that is serving as one convergent premise for the conclusion and a different one serving for another convergent premise. And essentially, when you understand this sentence, this string of sentences, what you're doing is recognizing intuitively, all you're doing is just this right here is essentially what's going on in your mind. You are recognizing that if this is true, this entails this, and this supports that. And the same, this supports this, and this supports that. These two are not related and support separately. So why on earth would you spend the time doing these little diagrams? Well, because arguments can get very, very, very complicated, and you could then insert this inside of anything else. And so it's just a matter of learning how the little parts fit together to form something larger. Does that make sense to everyone? This idea of what we have here is just 5 sentences that are clearly related, and what we're asking ourselves is, how are they related? And what we find is each step can be defined either convergently or serially, and then we're just working through of how they all fit together.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, but what is the relationship between 3 and 2 and then 5 and 4? Is it also like a premise and conclusion?
So the best, yes. And so this goes back to the notion of relative. So if you just concentrate on 4 and 5, you'd say that 4 is a conclusion, that 5 is the premise for. Or another way of putting this, if we want to speak a little more loosely, is 5 gives you a reason to believe 4. Now, if you then focus on just 1 and 4, now 4 becomes a premise for the conclusion 1. So if we focus here, premise conclusion. If we focus here, premise conclusion. So it's, in some sense, in the larger structure, it's serving both the role of a premise and a conclusion. A way you can think of it is it's like a sub-conclusion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you need like 5 in order to prove that 4 is correct, so that then you prove.
Exactly. Yeah. So in a certain sense, from this perspective, oftentimes we call this like a main premise, and this is a sub-premise. This is the premise of this main premise. I don't care about labels, though. The more important thing is just to understand that like the purpose of 5 is to support 4. So the purpose of the Honda got 5-star safety rating, the Ford got a 4-star safety rating. The purpose of this is to prove that the Honda is safer. And the purpose of bringing up that the Honda is safer is to provide one reason to think you should buy the Honda, not the Ford.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Here's a version that is similar to that one before with our the gluten intolerance. It's very close to the raining yesterday one with the car. It said, when it rained yesterday, the ground got wet. When it rained last week, the ground got wet. When it rained last month, the ground got wet. When it rained 10, blah, 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 blah. Imagine in here there are however many more. You've got 4 through 56, all of which are about the rain. Therefore, or when it rained 10 years ago, the ground got wet. So if it rains, then the ground gets wet. Or another way of putting this is, so whenever it rains, the ground gets wet. So if it rains, then the ground is always wet. But just if it rains, the ground is wet. Also then, if the ground gets wet, the worms come out and wriggle around. So if it rains, then the worms will come out and wriggle around. This is a long argument. It's 60 steps, but we can draw up the structure of it. So let's talk about it. Of this 60 sentence thing, I will give you a clue of what the overall conclusion is. What is the main thing that we're saying if we think it's either going to be first or last? Well, it's not going to be first because this is just like a statement of it got wet. So 60 is our conclusion. Okay. 60 here is going to be the conclusion. This, and also you can imagine, yeah, this is a case in which if you're talking to a child, you can imagine explaining to them why this is the case. That would be a context in which you'd bring this up. So if it rains, then the worms will come out and wriggle around. So if we were drawing a structure for it, I want to make sure that you can actually, I'm running out of board space. Okay, so I'm going to use this tiny little bit here and hope you can see it. So the conclusion's at the top, 60. So then, now we have to figure out what else is going on. So what is, just reading this over, just looking at it intuitively, commonsensically, what is the purpose of sentence 1 and 2 and 3 and 57? What are they doing?
They support 58, I think.
Exactly. They support 58. And when we were talking about inductive arguments, what does it take for an inductive argument to work? Is one fluke enough?
No, you need a few.
You need a few. So it's not simply that these are all providing support for 58. It's rather that they are together providing support for 58, because this one alone would not be enough to prove that 58 is true. You rather need a lot of evidence to prove that if you want to go from all these instances to this general claim, if it rains, then the ground gets wet, you have to have a lot of them. So what do we say when you have a lot of premises working together to support another further statement? Which is that serial, linked, or convergent?
Serial?
Serial?
So serial is the one where it's one after another. So it's one does, A does B, B does C. Which was the one in which they're working together at the same time to make sure. So in a serial one, another way of thinking about it is, this is actually a good way of separating the difference between a serial and a linked. Is in the case of a linked, one premise never provides support for a different premise. So look at our, if I'm a whale, I can swim. Premise 1. Premise 2, I am a whale. Conclusion, I can swim. So if we get rid of the conclusion and we just look at this, if I'm a whale, I can swim. Does that prove that I am a whale? Does it provide support that I am a whale?
No.
If I just tell you I'm a whale and you know nothing about whales, can you conclude anything about whales swimming? Another way of putting this is if I'm a blurg, I can swim, and I am a blurg. If I just tell you out of the blue that I'm a blurg, do you know anything about whether I can swim or not?
No.
No. So in this case, when the premises are linked, you can see that there's no connection between them. Contrast that with the car case. In the car case, there's clearly a connection just between these two. So if we go back to over here, with these 1 through 57, what's the relationship between 1 and 2? Is there any? By themselves?
Yes.
In some sense, yes, but do they provide support for each other? Does 2 prove that 1's the case?
No.
No, they're separate instances, but they together, working together, are supporting 58. So the way we write this one up is 1 through 57 together support 58, because 58 is a conclusion that follows from all of these past ones, but not any one of them working alone. And not that one of them proves another one that proves 58. It's rather that if you take them as one big unit, they prove 58. Does that make sense about why these ones are linked?
Yeah, that makes sense.
What is the relationship between, like, let's say 1 and 2?
So the relationship between 1 and 2 by themselves is not really anything. It's rather that if you take 1 and 2 and 3, all of them together, you're going to prove 58. So on this sort of case, it would look something like this, where because they're linked, it would look bloop, bloop, bloop. So 1 is there, 2 is there, 3 is there, ... is there, and 57 is here. So the relationship looks like this, where this is not proving that. And if it was serial, it would have looked like that. But there's no arrow going from 1 to 2. It's rather they're working together to prove 58.
Okay, I understand, I think.
And we're going to go over this a lot more next class, and we're going to keep working through these. But the basic idea is anytime that you have any premise that isn't going to support the conclusion by itself, but you can basically think of it as you need to lift up a table, but you don't have the strength by yourself to lift up a table. So what are you going to do?
Use help.
Yeah, you get help. You get a friend. That's what a linked premise is. You by yourself can't lift up that table. Your friend by themselves can't. But if the two of you work together, you can lift up the table. In the same way, by itself, the fact that it rained yesterday and the ground got wet doesn't prove that it always gets wet when it rains. However, if you have a lot of evidence, then that's going to give you a good conclusion that if it rains, then the ground's going to get wet. Now, so what we've basically got so far is this: 58, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 57. So what is the rest of the argument doing? What's going on with the rest of it? What did we do with numbers 59 and 60? Let me first off just write up 1 to 57, linked premise up to 58. So what then is the relationship between 58, 59, and 60? We said 60 was the conclusion. So what is the relationship between all of them? We know that 60 is at the very top, but what are 58, 59, and 60? How do they relate together?
59 is another premise.
So 59 is definitely another premise. So we've got 50, we know that 60 up here is at the very top. And we know that 59 is presumably a premise to 60. And so our question now then is, what type of premise is it? Is it that 59 is providing support for 58? Is it that 59 is providing a separate reason to believe 60? Or is it that 58 and 59 are working together to prove 60?
Seems like 58 and 59 are working together to prove 60.
Exactly, Nat. So the idea is that what we have is 58 and 59. Neither of them by themselves prove 60. But if we combine them, they together prove that 60 is the case. So this is another case in which we have these premises working together. So what we have is basically 1 through 58 is an inductive argument with 57 premises to prove the conclusion that if it rains, then it will get wet. And then we have that then gets attached to a deductive argument of a hypothetical syllogism of if it rains, then the ground gets wet. And if the ground gets wet, then the worms come out, lead to the conclusion that if it rains or whenever it rains, the worms will come out. So does the way those parts fit together make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay. A silly question. There's no way possible that two different premises would be like a linked. I'm just asking, like, based on that board, the linked premises wouldn't become a convergent. It's always going to stay within that specific premises.
What you could do is I actually think you could have an extreme case in which you use the same statement both as a convergent premise and as part of a linked, but you'd have to write it up a second time. So it'd be something like, or you could have the same convergent premise, same premise as part of different convergent premises. So for instance, I'm gonna have to think about coming up with examples on this one, but it's basically, you can get very creative with it. But in terms of, you would never have like this being a part of a linked, but then also convergently, separately linking around up here.
Got it. That's what I meant. Thank you.
Yeah, so that wouldn't, so in that sort of case, you wouldn't ever do that, because if it needs support to prove something, then it can't stand on its own to support something. It's a sort of way, if I need help to move a table, then I couldn't on my own move that table. And if it's a convergent premise, is basically like the strong man who's able to lift the table by themselves because they can stand on their own. Maybe they get help, but they don't need that help. That help is also a separate sort of reason. So yeah, you wouldn't ever have this, because if you can do something as a convergent premise, so if you have a case where like the Honda is safer, you don't need to then combine that the Honda is safer with something else, because this already is a piece of evidence that you should buy the Honda. And it's only if you need to combine it with something else that it becomes a linked premise. All right, there's one more example we're gonna go over, and then we'll be done for the day. All right, so this is a long one, but if you break it down, it's not too bad. So if Thanos has all the Infinity Stones, then we're all screwed. There are 6 Infinity Stones. Thanos has the first. Thor told me so. Thanos has the second. I saw him with it. Thanos has the third. He inherited it from his dad. Thanos has the fourth. He stole it from Tony Stark. Thanos has the fifth. He won it in Vegas. Thanos has the sixth. He found it while walking his dog. So Thanos has all the Infinity Stones. So we're all screwed. this is an argument. What is the main conclusion of this argument? If you were to come across this, what would be the main thing that a person was trying to get across?
We're all screwed because Thanos has all 6 Infinity Stones.
Yeah, so this is the big one, is that he has all the stones and that we're all screwed. And really, at the end of the day, the reason you're even bringing up that he has all 6 stones is because you're screwed. So this right here, 16, is the main conclusion. The main thing somebody who brought this up would be trying to explain is that we're all screwed. So if we draw this up on the board over here, at the top of our little pyramid is number 16. 16, main conclusion, we're all screwed. Now, looking over this, what are the relationships between other premises? If you were just to describe all the other sentences here, how do they fit together? Just describe some relationships you see, things like that. So like just picking 2 arbitrarily, what's the relationship between 3 and 4?
I'm sorry, I don't know if it's me, but it looks a little blurry.
Yeah, it's blurry.
Yep, let me give it a second. Are we back?
Yes.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So 3 and 4. Thanos has the first Infinity Stone. Thor told me so. What's the relationship between those 2 things? Just ignore everything else.
Premise and conclusion.
Yeah, so which one's the premise and which one's the conclusion?
4 is I don't know.
So so 3 is the premise. So Thanos has the first. Is that proof that Thor told you so? Or is it that Thor told you so is proof that Thanos has the stone?
Thor told you so is proof that Thanos has the stone.
Yeah. 4 is the proof that Thanos has the stone. Your reason to conclude that Thanos has the stone is that Thor told you so. So just focusing there, we have somewhere along the line, 4 leads to 3. So now, what other relationships do we see up here on this board? Just pick 2 numbers, and is there a relationship between them? Like a direct sort of thing.
5 and 6.
5 and 6 is another one. Thanos has the second stone. And then 6, I saw him with it. It being with the second stone. So what then is the premise and what's the conclusion here?
5 is the conclusion and 6.
5 is the conclusion that Thanos has the second, and your evidence for it is that you saw him with it. So we've got 6 leading to 5. Based on the fact that this is up here like 7 times, can anyone guess what other relationships might be up here? We've got, you can see that
8.
So 7 and 8, because Thanos has the third, looks a lot like Thanos has the first, looks a lot like Thanos has the second. So yeah, we have 3 and 4, 5 and 8, or 5 and 6, 7 and 8. Anyone guess what some other ones are, even if I don't show you them?
13, 14.
The argument?
9 and 10.
Yep, 10 up to 9, and 11, 12, and 14, 13. So essentially, what this is a list of a bunch of miniature arguments where it's a statement that he has something and an explanation or the proof that that's actually true. How do we know he has the first? Well, Thor told us so. How do we know he has the third? Well, it's true that he inherited it from his dad, or that's the reason we have. So essentially, if you look at it this way, we've got 6 little mini arguments. Now, why on earth are these 6 mini arguments here? What is the purpose of talking about every single stone one at a time? Going back here, in this structure, if Thanos has all the Infinity Stones, we're screwed. There are 6 Infinity Stones. He has the first, he has the second. What is the purpose of bringing up every single stone? What is that doing?
Because if he collects them all, we're all screwed.
And how do we know that he collected them all? What's the key here? Why did we bother listing just 6 stones?
We're screwed.
So, but why did we stop at 6? Why didn't we start talking about the 7th stone and the 8th stone?
Because number 2 says there are 6 infinity stones.
Exactly. So number 2 shows that there's just 6 stones. So number 2 says there's just 6 stones. We've now accounted for every single one of the stones. So those together allow us to conclude what? If we know if we've worked off one at a time, every single one of the stones. Also, class, I think, officially ended. So if you want to get going, feel free. I just want to finish off this one example. So if we know that we've accounted for each individual stone, and we know there's 6 stones, what then does the fact that he has each stone and the total that there are 6 allow us to conclude up here?
It's linked? I don't know.
So yeah, so you're right, 100% right that they're linked. And what are they linked towards proving?
The first premise that if he has all the infinity stones, that we're screwed. So therefore we're screwed because he has them all.
So, but the key here, there's one extra step you missed there, Lauren, which is this one. Because there's 6 and he has all 6, he's got them all. So the key is that it's these together combined with number 2, that there's just 6, allows us to conclude that he has them all. So I'm just going to write all, which is number 15. And number 1 says if he has them all, we're screwed. And so we combine those together, and then at the top of the board where you can't see is 16. So that's the way in which this big, long argument ends up getting constructed together. So each of these steps is the explanation for how you know he got that stone is a serial argument. And those collections of serial arguments, together with the fact that there's only 6 total stones, allows you to conclude that he has all of the stones. And once you know he has all the stones, combined with the fact that if he has them all, we're all screwed, we come to the conclusion that we're all screwed. And so that's the way this long 16-sentence passage that intuitively you all are able to grasp can be written out and constructed. And why would you ever bother to do this? Well, because there's a lot of arguments that are not obviously true. And if you can recognize the structure, it's easier to identify if they're valid, good arguments or not. All right, I'm going to stop there. Does anyone, if anyone has any questions, feel free to stick around and ask me questions. But I'm officially going to end the class here. You are all free to go, and I will see you all on Thursday.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you. When I'm sorry, when are you going to post YouTube?
I'm going to post the YouTube. Basically, if I wait until the morning, it's a much higher quality. So I will probably wait until the morning. But if you really desperately want to watch it tonight, I can post it as soon as I'm home.
Yeah, I can wait till the morning. I just want to catch the last few notes.
Yeah. I will post it sometime tomorrow morning.
And there's no homework for Thursday.
No homework for Thursday, and the next homework will be due Tuesday, and we'll talk a lot more about that in class on Thursday.
And no one said anything about us going back yet.
As of right now, I still have not been told, so we're going to continue as of right now. This week will be Zooming, and then if anything changes, we can try to switch next week, but as of right now, I've heard nothing, which makes me think we'll once again be online.
Understood. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Professor, are they